The rain hadn't stopped since dawn, but that wasn't what chilled me. It was my daughter-in-law's voice, sharp as a blade, slicing through the drizzle outside the church gates. "From now on, you'll sleep with the dogs." She hurled my suitcases onto the wet driveway, the wheels spinning before crashing into a puddle. Mud splashed over my black shoes and the hem of my morning dress. I didn't argue. I simply lifted my chin and smiled, the kind of smile that made her flinch for a heartbeat. She thought she'd won. She thought the house behind her, the bank accounts, and the $30 million my husband had built all belonged to her and my son. She didn't know the truth. Every penny, every brick, every acre of land was in my name, and behind my silence I held more than grief, I held power. I whispered to myself, "Not yet, Eleanor. Let them believe you're broken." That was the night I promised Richard, even from his grave, I would protect what we built and reclaim the dignity they tried to bury with him. The bells of St. Augustine Church were still tolling when I stepped off the gravel path, umbrella trembling in my hand. The funeral had ended hours ago, yet the scent of lilies and rain lingered like ghosts. Richard's coffin had been lowered into the dark soil of Memorial Garden, and with it, the last piece of the life I once understood. People always said grief came in waves. They never mentioned the silence that followed when everyone left, and you were the only one standing beside the hole. Aaron stood by the hearse, earlier eyes red, hands fidgeting with his cufflinks. My son had always been kind but weak, easily bent by the will of stronger voices. Vanessa was that voice now. She wore a fitted black dress and designer heels, her face hidden behind dark glasses. Not a tear, not even a tremor. While the priest spoke about Richard's generosity, she was already scrolling her phone, nodding to guests, offering smiles that belonged at a gala, not a burial. I saw her glance toward the older men from Richard's business circle, measuring them with the cool calculation of someone already rewriting her future. When the ceremony ended, the guests drifted away, leaving muddy footprints and umbrellas turned inside out. I lingered by the grave, placing my hand on the slick mahogany lid one last time. "Rest easy, Richard," I whispered. "I'll be fine. I promise." The wind caught my words and carried them across the field. I didn't know then that the promise I made at that moment would become my vow for justice. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened to the color of lead. Aaron drove, while Vanessa sat beside him in silence, her manicured nails tapping rhythmically on the steering wheel. I sat in the back seat, hands folded around the black shawl Richard had given me on our 25th anniversary. Savannah's streets blurred past the window, rain streaking down like silver threads. The car smelled faintly of Vanessa's perfume, something sweet but suffocating like deceit covered in sugar. No one spoke until we turned onto the long oak-lined driveway leading to the Brooks estate. The house stood on the hill like a proud memory of better days, white columns, dark shutters, a porch that once overflowed with laughter. Richard had designed every corner of it himself. He used to say, "This house will always protect you, Eleanor." I clung to that memory as the car rolled to a stop. When I opened the door, the first thing I saw were my 3 brown suitcases sitting by the garage in the rain. I frowned, thinking it was a mistake. But then I looked up. Vanessa stood on the porch, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice still hoarse from the service. She shrugged the corner of her mouth, curving slightly. "Oh, I thought you already understood. Now that Richard's gone, things have to change." "Change," I echoed. She stepped closer, heels clicking against the wood, her voice light and cruel. "You'll stay in the garage for a while. We're rearranging rooms. The dogs sleep out there, but I'm sure you'll manage." Aaron's face flushed. "Vanessa," she cut him off, "it's just temporary, until we decide what's next." I looked at my son, searching for the boy who once cried in my arms when his puppy died, the one who promised he'd always take care of me, but he couldn't meet my eyes. "It's all right, Aaron," I said softly. "Your wife has made herself clear." Vanessa tilted her head, pleased. "Good, I'm glad we understand each other." Then, she turned, opened the garage door and said over her shoulder, "You can settle in there, I'll bring a blanket." The sound of the door closing behind her echoed through the rain. For a moment, I stood motionless, the chill seeping through my shoes. The garage smelled of rust and old oil walls stained with water, rings and dust. A small cot leaned against the wall where Richard used to keep his toolbox. In the corner, 2 dog bowls glistened with leftover rainwater. I bent down, picked up my suitcases and dragged them inside. My fingers ached, but my mind was oddly calm. When I sat on the edge of the cot, I noticed something on the small wooden table, a half-empty box of dog biscuits, and a chipped lamp with a yellow bulb. I turned it on. The light flickered, casting shadows across the floor. That's when I saw the outline of a small safe built into the lower wall, half hidden behind a stack of old paint cans. The sight of it made my breath catch. Richard's private safe. I traced my fingers along the cold metal, feeling the shape of the keyhole. From inside my purse I pulled the small golden key he'd left me the night before he died. He'd pressed it into my palm, whispering, "For when you need to remind them who you are." I didn't open it. Not yet. I just set the key on the table beside the lamp. The rain pattered on the roof, steady and rhythmic like a heartbeat. Hours passed before I lay down, staring at the ceiling. I thought about Richard's last words about the people I once trusted sitting upstairs in the warmth of the house I built. I thought about Vanessa's smirk and Aaron's silence. "They think you're weak, Eleanor," I heard Richard's voice in memory. "Let them. The right silence is the strongest weapon." I smiled faintly in the dark. I remember love. Outside, thunder rolled over the marshes. I reached for my notebook from my purse, the one I used to jot down grocery lists and birthdays. On the first clean page I wrote day 1. "They moved me to the garage. They believe I have nothing. They're wrong." I closed the book, placed it under my pillow and whispered into the night, "You wanted a war, Vanessa. You'll get one. But not the kind you expect." By morning the rain had stopped. Light spilled through the small window, landing on the golden key. I could hear footsteps above me, laughter, the sound of plates clinking. The house was alive again, but not with love, only greed. I stood, stretched my aching shoulders and touched the key once more. It was warm from the sun. I slipped it into my pocket. Upstairs, Vanessa called out, "Eleanor, could you make coffee? We're out of creamer." Her tone was honeyed, the kind people use when they think they own you. I didn't answer right away. I looked around the garage, the rusted tools, the damp walls, the 2 empty dog bowls. Then I said quietly, but clearly, "Of course." Because this wasn't defeat. This was observation. And observation, I had learned from Richard, was the first step toward victory. That evening, as the sun sank behind the moss-covered oaks, I sat on the cot and listened to the house settling above me. Every creak, every muffled voice, every step on the floorboards was a line in a script I was beginning to read. I opened my notebook again and wrote, "Let them think the widow is harmless. Let them think she's done. Tomorrow I'll start listening." I closed it, turned off the lamp and lay back down. The air smelled faintly of rain and metal, but for the first time since Richard's death, I felt something close to peace. Not the peace of surrender, the peace before a storm you know will finally belong to you. The next morning sunlight filtered through the small window above the garage, cutting thin lines of gold across the cement floor. I woke before dawn, out of habit more than sleep. The air was damp, the scent of wet soil still lingering from last night's rain. Upstairs I could hear the faint echo of Vanessa's heels clicking against the hardwood floor. The sound came every morning at precisely 6:30, not because she had somewhere important to go, but because she liked being heard. A few minutes later, laughter drifted down bright and hollow. I climbed the narrow steps to the kitchen. The smell of coffee and expensive perfume met me halfway. Vanessa stood by the island, her silk robe tied perfectly, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up. "You're early," she said. "Good. We'll need breakfast in 20 minutes. Aaron sat at the table, still in his work shirt, head bent over his phone. He looked tired, as though every word he didn't say weighed more than any conversation he'd ever had. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled without meeting my eyes. I smiled softly. "Good morning, sweetheart." The table was already set. Eggs, bacon, oranges, and a note in Vanessa's looping handwriting. "Eggs Benedict for Aaron. Pancakes for the kids. I'll have fruit only." She'd underlined the last sentence twice, as if her diet were an act of superiority. I tied my apron and started cooking. Every movement was slow, deliberate. Richard used to say, "Even the way you crack an egg tells people who you are." I cracked mine quietly without breaking the yolk. Vanessa's voice cut through the clinking of dishes. We'll need to talk about utilities later. The bills have gone up since. Well, since Richard's arrangements. I didn't look up. I'm sure you'll handle it, dear. You always do. She paused, her reflection catching mine in the oven's metal surface. Oh, I intend to. Her tone was sweet, but the sugar was laced with venom. Erin shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa, she waved her manicured hand. I'm just saying we should be practical. Mom doesn't need the main guest room when we have space downstairs. I placed a plate in front of her. You mean the garage? She smiled thinly. I mean the garage. Erin said nothing. The silence after his non-answer filled the room like fog. I poured coffee, pretending not to notice the tremor in my own hands. When they left for work, the house fell into a heavy stillness. I cleaned the kitchen until the counters shone the way Richard liked them. My reflection stared back at me from the granite surface, older maybe, but not weak. As I carried the trash outside, something white caught my eye near the recycling bin, a crumpled spa receipt. Serenity Day Spa. $1.450. Paid with household account. Household account. Richard had set that fund aside for maintenance insurance and property taxes. Now it paid for her massages. I smoothed the paper flat and folded it carefully into my apron pocket. Later I would write it down. Not out of spite, out of order. In the afternoon the sky turned pale blue, the kind that made the Spanish moss shimmer silver. I sat under the magnolia tree Richard planted years ago. Its blossoms were in full bloom, white and heavy with fragrance. I could almost hear his voice again. One day this tree will shade you, Eleanor. He hadn't known how right he'd be. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Erin appeared, jacket slung over one arm. Mom, he said quietly, Vanessa didn't mean to sound harsh this morning. I know, I said. She's just trying to find her rhythm. He hesitated, guilt shadowing his eyes. It's only temporary. Until everything settles down. Of course, I said gently. Everything's temporary. But in my mind, I was already drawing lines, invisible ones. The kind that mark where kindness ends and strategy begins. After Erin went back inside, I returned to the garage and opened my small notebook. On a clean page I wrote Day 2, spa receipt, $1.450 from house account. Vanessa manages utilities. Erin silent. Observe pattern. I closed it and slid it under my pillow. The same pillow I'd carried from the main house years ago when the children were little and nightmares came often. Funny how the same pillow now absorbed my quiet fury. That evening as I washed the dinner plates, Vanessa talked on the phone in the next room, her laughter echoing like glass breaking. I told them I'd handle the accounts myself. She doesn't even know what's in her own name. My fingers froze in the suds. She was wrong, but I didn't correct her. I just kept scrubbing, each motion steady, precise. When she hung up, she walked in, smiling as though nothing had happened. Oh, Eleanor, I've been thinking, she said. The kids have soccer on Saturday. You could stay with them while I go to my yoga class. I dried my hands on a towel. Of course. She glanced at the floor, then added with mock politeness, try not to let the dogs out again. They left muddy prints last time. I'll be careful, I said, my voice calm as water. After she left, I stood there for a while, the ticking clock, the only sound. Then I whispered, you think I'm blind, but I'm just waiting until you blink. Later that night, I heard the faint thud of a door upstairs and the rustle of paper. I climbed halfway up the stairs and stopped when I heard Erin's voice. She's still upset, he said softly. Maybe we should help her move somewhere more comfortable. Vanessa's voice came back sharp and quick. You mean a nursing home? There's a good one in Charleston, cheaper than keeping her here. Cheaper. I gripped the railing, feeling my nails bite into the wood. For a second, I thought my knees would give out. Then I exhaled long and steady. I just meant Erin started, but she cut him off. It's for her own good. She's lonely. We're busy. It's not like she'd noticed the difference. I backed down the stairs quietly, step by step, until I reached the garage. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was calm, eerily calm, the kind that comes before a deliberate act. I opened my notebook and wrote under today's entry, Vanessa mentioned nursing home. Objective, remove me. Response document, observe, wait. The next morning I woke before dawn again. Vanessa's laughter floated down from the living room. She was on another call, giggling softly. I heard her say, "Yes, Charles, I'll handle it. Just wire the funds to Coastal Serenity LLC before Monday." The same name from the spa receipt. Coastal Serenity. I poured coffee slowly, memorizing every word. She ended the call and looked up at me. What she said, catching my gaze. "Nothing," I answered. "Just admiring how well you multitask." She smirked. "Some of us have to." When she turned away, I lifted the small golden key from my pocket and rolled it between my fingers. It glinted under the kitchen light, the same light that caught the diamonds on her hand. She thought those rings gave her power. She didn't realize the real power was the one hidden quietly in my palm. By noon, the house was empty. I wiped the counters, fed the dogs, and sat at the kitchen table. The sun fell in bright stripes across the floorboards. The same floor Richard had laid plank by plank with his own hands. I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of magnolia through the open window. It reminded me of his voice, again calm, unwavering. "When people try to take what's yours, don't fight with noise, fight with patience." I smiled. "You'd be proud, Richard. I'm learning." That night, as I prepared to sleep, the moonlight filtered through the small window in the garage, illuminating the old wooden table where the golden key rested beside my notebook. I touched both gently, one symbol of love, one of purpose. Day 3, I wrote. "They plan for my exit. I plan for my return." I set down the pen, folded my hands, and looked up at the cracked ceiling. For the first time, I didn't feel like a guest in this house. I felt like a ghost waiting for the right moment to haunt the living. I woke before sunrise the same way Richard used to. The clock on the garage wall ticked softly, the only sound breaking the silence. I sat up, pulled on a cardigan, and listened. The faint hum of the coffee machine upstairs told me Vanessa was already awake. She was always the first to claim the morning loud, heel-strong perfume, a soundtrack of control. When I entered the kitchen, she didn't look up. Her silk blouse was perfectly pressed, her lipstick flawless. "Morning, Eleanor," she said, like she was greeting an employee. "The eggs are in the fridge. You know how Aaron likes them." "I remember," I replied, taking the pan from the rack. The stove's blue flame lit small and steady. Vanessa leaned against the counter, sipping her latte. "I've been thinking," she began, and that tone, the one Richard used to call her business voice, returned. "About long-term arrangements." I cracked an egg. "What kind of arrangements?" She swirled her spoon in her cup. "You've been under a lot of stress. Maybe a quiet place would do you good. There's a lovely care facility near Charleston. Peaceful, private, affordable." I turned slowly, holding the spatula mid-air. "You think I belong in a care home?" She smiled wide and hollow. "I think you deserve rest." Aaron entered just then, adjusting his tie. "Good morning," he said quickly, sensing the tension. "Smells great, Mom." Vanessa kissed his cheek and picked up her handbag. "Don't forget we have that meeting at noon." After they left, I stood at the sink staring out the window. The magnolia tree outside swayed in the morning breeze. Richard had planted it our first year here. He said it would outlive both of us. Maybe it would. I cleaned the dishes slowly, each motion measured, and when the kitchen was spotless, I went upstairs to his office. The door creaked as I opened it. Dust danced in the shaft of light that fell through the window. The room smelled of old paper and cedar, his scent. I ran my fingers over the mahogany desk. The top drawer still stuck a little on the left, just as it always had. Inside were ledgers, bank statements, and a few letters. Beneath them, a brown envelope. My heart quickened. I pulled it out, unfolded the contents. Insurance papers. A trust fund contract. Each page bore Richard's signature and one other name, mine. I exhaled slowly. "You planned for this, didn't you?" The trust detailed his assets, the house, investment accounts, real estate. Every line ended with the same note: beneficiary Eleanor Brooks. I pressed my palm to my chest. For a moment, the weight of his foresight felt like a hand resting gently over mine. Downstairs, the dogs barked. The sound pulled me back. I returned to the garage, closed the door, and unlocked the small safe I'd found behind the paint cans. The golden key turned easily. Inside were several velvet pouches, a stack of documents, and a sealed letter addressed in Richard's handwriting. I sat down, trembling slightly, and broke the seal. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And if I know you, you're trying to stay quiet to let others take the lead. Don't. Everything I built belongs to you. They'll try to confuse you, maybe even humiliate you, but the truth is written in ink and signed by law. Use what's inside the safe when the time is right, not to hurt but to restore what's yours. All my love, R. Tears blurred the words, but I didn't cry for long. Instead, I placed the letter back in the safe and locked it. The sound of the click echoed softly like a promise sealing itself. That evening I prepared dinner: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, salad, the kind of meal that used to bring this family together. But as we sat down, the distance at the table felt like a chasm. Erin complimented the food half-heartedly. Vanessa poured herself a glass of wine and smiled like nothing was wrong. "Mom," she said, lightly, "did you ever think about what you'll do next? Maybe sell that old lake cabin. You don't really use it." "That cabin was Richard's favorite," I replied. She shrugged. "All the more reason to let it go. It's just sitting there collecting dust." I looked at her over the rim of my glass. "Funny, that's what greed does too." Her smile faltered. Erin shifted in his seat, pretending not to hear. After dinner, I washed the dishes alone. When I reached to hang the dish rag, I noticed the small notepad Vanessa kept near the phone. At the top, a list written in her tidy cursive: "Call Derek Serenity Holdings LLC, confirm wire transfer, draft property transfer form." I froze. Serenity Holdings. The name matched the spa receipt I'd found. A connection. I copied the note word for word into my own small notebook and tucked it back exactly where it was. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rain tapped softly on the garage roof. I turned on the lamp, took out my notebook, and began writing. Day 4. Vanessa plans transfer via Serenity Holdings LLC. Trust confirms all assets under my name. Wait for confirmation. Stay invisible. I stopped writing when I heard the front door open upstairs. The clock read 11:47 p.m. Footsteps. Light, careful ones. Then laughter, a man's voice. My pulse quickened. I moved closer to the small window that looked up toward the driveway. The porch light was off, but I saw movement, a figure in a dark suit, tall, leaning close to Vanessa. He brushed her hair aside. She whispered something and laughed again, softer this time. I stepped back into the dark, hand gripping the window frame. "So it begins," I murmured. When the door closed and the lights upstairs dimmed, I opened the safe again. This time I took out one velvet pouch and unwrapped what was inside: a silver flash drive, labeled R.M.B. Investments, Richard's initials. I plugged it into my old laptop. The screen flickered, and a folder appeared: Brooks Holdings, Accounts and Transfers. Inside were detailed spreadsheets of every property and account tied to the Brooks estate, all in my name. There were also notes about an offshore account and a subfolder titled Contingency Plan, V. Vanessa Brooks. My throat tightened. Richard hadn't trusted her either. I spent the rest of the night reading line by line until the first light of dawn touched the window. When I finally closed the laptop, my eyes burned, but my mind was sharp. The next morning, Vanessa greeted me with her usual cheer. "You look tired," she said, pouring herself coffee. "Rough night. Just couldn't sleep," I replied. "You should try one of those herbal teas. I ordered some from Serenity Wellness. They're amazing." I smiled faintly. "You do like Serenity, don't you?" She blinked, confused. "Excuse me, nothing," I said, setting down my cup. "Just admiring how consistent you are." She frowned slightly, but before she could speak, the doorbell rang. Erin went to answer it, and I watched as a man in a dark gray suit handed him an envelope. "Delivery for Mrs. Brooks," he said. Vanessa's head snapped up. "For me, no," Erin replied, reading the label. "For Mom." She stared, but I reached out calmly and took it from his hand. The seal bore Denton Law Associates, Richard's old attorney. I waited until they both left for work before opening it. Inside were updated trust confirmations, asset reports, and a brief note. "Mrs. Brooks, per Richard's instructions, all holdings remain in your name. Should any party attempt unauthorized transfer, contact me immediately." I folded the letter, placed it carefully in the safe, and whispered, "You're still protecting me, love." That evening when Vanessa came home, she walked past me without a word. But her perfume lingered heavy, cloying, suffocating. I sat alone in the garage writing the final lines of the day. Day 5. The game is changing. They think they hold the power. Soon they'll learn who truly does. I set the pen down and looked at the golden key resting beside the lamp. The house above me was filled with secrets, but none of them scared me anymore. Every sound, every whisper, every lie, they were pieces of a puzzle that Richard had already started. I just had to finish it. When the clock struck midnight, I closed the notebook and smiled to myself. The widow in the garage wasn't invisible anymore. She was watching. And she was ready. Rain came again that night, soft and steady, tapping against the garage window like a quiet visitor. I sat at the small table, notebook, open, pen poised above the page. I'd spent the past week observing everything: Vanessa's patterns, Aaron's silences, the rhythm of the house. People reveal themselves through repetition. Her vanity, his guilt, my restraint. All three of us had become characters in a play that only one of us knew was being recorded. At 5:30 the next morning, I heard the familiar sound of heels clicking above me. The kitchen light glowed through the floorboards. Vanessa moved with the precision of someone who believed control equaled perfection. I climbed the stairs quietly. When I entered, the smell of coffee filled the room. Aaron sat by the table scrolling through his phone. Vanessa stood by the counter wearing a navy blazer, her hair sleek and straight. "Morning," she said, not looking up. "Can you iron this?" She dropped a cream silk blouse into my hands. "Of course." Aaron offered a half smile. "You don't have to, Mom." "I don't mind," I said. "I've been doing this long before either of you knew how to hold a spoon." Vanessa laughed softly, sipping from her cup. "Such devotion. No wonder Richard adored you." Her tone was sweet, but it carried the quiet poison of mockery. I smiled anyway and went to the laundry room. As I pressed the blouse, I noticed a credit card statement sitting on top of the dryer. My name wasn't on it, hers was. I wasn't the type to pry, but the bold numbers on the first line caught my eye. Serenity Wellness, $3.450. Another entry below it, Aspen Yoga Retreat, $1.200. My fingers tightened around the iron handle. Vanessa was siphoning household money into personal accounts, money that technically wasn't hers to spend. When I finished pressing, I folded the blouse neatly and returned it. "Here you go," I said. She didn't thank me. She never did. After they left, I waited until the sound of Aaron's car faded. Then I went upstairs into the office Richard had once claimed as his thinking room. The air was thick with dust and memory. I turned on the lamp, opened the old desktop computer and entered the password that only he and I knew, Magnolia 1956. The screen blinked to life, slow but faithful. I navigated through the files until I found the shared household account. My heart beat steadily as I scrolled through the transactions. Every month, large withdrawals, $5,000 here, $7,800 there, each labeled to Serene Holdings LLC. The pattern stretched back nearly 8 months. I printed every record and set them in a folder marked Verification. Richard had always believed in documentation. Truth, he used to say, doesn't yell. It signs its name quietly. That afternoon the children came home from school. Emily 10 ran into the kitchen with her backpack bouncing. "Grandma," she cried, holding up a report card. "I got an A in reading." I hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of you." Noah followed quieter, clutching a drawing. "It's you," he said shyly, showing me a sketch of a woman sitting under a tree with a book. "It's beautiful," I told him. "But I think you forgot something." "What?" he asked. "The crown," I said, tapping my head. He giggled. Vanessa entered moments later, heels clacking, voice sharp. "Emily, change your shoes." And Noah, "Homework before TV." They scurried off without protest. "You're home early," I said. "Board meeting was cancelled," she replied, rummaging through the mail. "Honestly, the incompetence of that company drives me insane." I watched her pull out a glossy envelope with the logo Serene Holdings LLC printed in gold. She froze when she saw me looking. "It's just business," she said quickly, shoving it into her bag. I smiled. "I'm sure it is." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I returned to the office. The rain had started again, drumming softly on the windows. I turned on the desk lamp, its glow catching the edge of a framed photograph. Richard in his study arms, crossed eyes steady. I whispered, "I'm doing what you taught me." I logged in again, this time tracing the digital trail. The withdrawals linked to an account registered under Vanessa's maiden name, Vanessa Lynn Carter. The company didn't exist outside of a P.O. box in Atlanta. I leaned back in the chair, my mind calm. So that's your game. I gathered the papers, made copies, and stored them in a manila envelope. The rest I sealed in the safe. When I returned to the garage, the house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I sat at the small table and wrote Day 7, confirmed pattern of transfers from household account to Serene Holdings LLC. Vanessa using maiden name alias, Aaron unaware. Keep silent, watch for next move. The next morning Vanessa's mood was unusually bright. She hummed while pouring orange juice, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Aaron, she said we should talk about refinancing the estate. With the market up, we could invest in a Dallas property. Aaron frowned. That sounds risky. It's called being proactive, she said. Dad always said money should move. I stirred the batter for pancakes. Richard also said some money should stay put, especially when it already has a home. She turned, smiling too widely. You always have a quote, don't you? I nodded. Always. When she left for her so-called yoga class later that day, I watched from the window as her car pulled out of the driveway. I waited 10 minutes, then went upstairs to the office. On the desk sat her laptop still open. I shouldn't have looked. But curiosity is a moral line that betrayal erases easily. Her inbox was full of messages between her and a man named Derek Cole. The subject lines told their own story: next transfer, private account, finalize before month end. And then one that stopped me cold: divorce paperwork nearly finished, waiting on estate confirmation. I scrolled, reading line after line. Derek's tone was casual, confident. Once her name's off the records, we're free. Savannah won't even notice we're gone. Free. I saved every email to a flash drive and backed up the files on a hidden cloud account Richard had once set up for emergencies. When I finished, I shut the laptop and stood by the window, watching clouds gather over the marsh. Lightning flickered in the distance. They thought I was asleep in the garage, counting days until death. But I was counting something else: mistakes. At dinner, Vanessa was radiant. She'd changed her hair, added new earrings, smiled more than usual. Aaron, she said sweetly, I'm so proud of how you're handling things. We should celebrate soon. Maybe a small getaway, he smiled faintly. Maybe. I served them chicken, pouring wine into her glass last. When she raised it, I noticed her nails trembling just slightly. Guilt dressed as poise. I sat down across from her and said, Funny thing, Vanessa. I dreamed about Richard last night. He said he left everything exactly where it belonged. She froze for a split second, then laughed too loudly. You and your dreams. Maybe, I said softly. But sometimes dreams are just the truth waiting for its turn. Her eyes flickered. Then she smiled, the mask back in place. That night I went to bed with the flash drive tucked under my pillow. The rain had stopped, replaced by the rhythmic chirping of crickets outside. I wrote one final line in my notebook before turning off the light. Day 8. They think they're winning. Let them. Tomorrow I start playing too. I lay down, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere upstairs I heard laughter again, hers high and false. But this time it didn't sting. It sounded like the ticking of a clock running out of time. The first real morning of summer arrived, warm and blinding sunlight spilling across the kitchen tile. I was already awake before the house stirred, standing by the window with a cup of coffee gone cold in my hands. Upstairs, the sound of drawers closing, heels pacing, the hum of a hairdryer, Vanessa's daily overture of vanity. Aaron's softer rhythm followed, shuffling papers, keys clinking, the low murmur of a man who'd learned to speak quietly to survive. When I stepped into the kitchen, she was there in a white sheath dress, her reflection glowing in the glass oven door. Morning, she said lightly, without looking. We'll need breakfast early today. Aaron has a presentation at the firm. I nodded, reaching for the eggs. I'll make it the way he likes. Perfect. She opened her bag, pulling out her phone. And don't forget, the children have piano lessons after school. I'll be out most of the day. Yoga again? I asked softly. Her eyes met mine through the reflection, lips curling in that slight smirk she thought was invisible. You remember well. I cracked an egg, the shell breaking with a satisfying snap. I remember everything. Aaron came downstairs, kissed her cheek, and said a tired goodbye. She reminded him to eat something green and turned back to her phone. When his car pulled away, I watched her from the corner of my eye. She checked her watch, poured another cup of coffee, and looked too polished, too painted for yoga. By 9:15, the front door closed behind her. The scent of her perfume hung heavy in the air, something expensive, musky, defiant. I waited until the sound of her car faded completely, then walked to the garage. I retrieved the small silver flash drive from the safe, slipped it into my purse, and called a cab. The driver, a quiet man with a salt and pepper beard, glanced at me in the mirror. "Where to, ma'am?" "Follow the white BMW ahead of us," I said. He raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Got it." Savannah's streets gleamed under the morning sun, humidity rising like steam from the asphalt. The BMW moved with confidence, weaving through traffic before turning toward downtown. We followed at a discreet distance until it pulled up in front of the Palmetto Hotel, polished stone glass doors, the kind of place where betrayal came with valet service. "Park there," I told him, "and keep the meter running." Inside the lobby, the air smelled of lilies and polished wood. I removed my sunglasses and scanned the room. Vanessa stood near the bar, her red hair gleaming under the lights, her posture soft in a way it never was at home. Across from her sat a man in a navy suit, tall, smiling Derek Cole. They spoke closely, heads bent, fingers brushing across the table. He passed her a brown envelope. She laughed, her hand resting briefly on his. I slipped my phone from my purse, tapped the screen twice, and the camera began to record. The scene unfolded quietly, like theater meant for an audience of one. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice low but animated. I caught only fragments. "Transfer. Next week. No risk, trust me." Derek nodded, then kissed her wrist. I lowered my phone. That was enough. As I turned toward the exit, the concierge smiled politely. "Have a good morning, ma'am." "I already have," I said, and walked out into the sunlight. Back in the cab, the driver glanced at me again. "Did you find what you were looking for?" I met his eyes in the rearview mirror. Exactly what I expected. He chuckled softly. "People don't follow others unless they already know the truth." I smiled faintly. "You're a wise man." By the time I reached the estate, the heat had risen and the magnolia blossoms drooped heavy with scent. Inside the garage, I transferred the video to my laptop, saving 2 copies, one to an encrypted drive, another to the hidden cloud Richard had built for me. Then I sat back and exhaled. The footage was clear: the hotel sign, the table, the envelope, the kiss. It was proof not just of infidelity, but of conspiracy. And Vanessa, in all her arrogance, hadn't even looked over her shoulder once. That evening she came home in workout leggings, hair pulled into a ponytail, pretending exhaustion. "Traffic was insane," she said, dropping her gym bag on the table. "Yoga was intense today." "Hot yoga?" I asked, stirring the stew on the stove. She blinked. "What, your perfume smells stronger when it's warm," I said calmly. "You must have worked up quite a sweat." She froze for just a fraction of a second before smiling too brightly. "You notice everything, don't you?" I try. At dinner, she was all charm, refilling Aaron's glass, laughing too loudly at the children's jokes. I sat quietly, watching, listening, memorizing. When the plates were cleared, I retreated to the garage and wrote my notes. Day 10. Confirmed affair. Video recorded. Partner identified Derek Cole. Keep silence. Patience now equals power later. I closed the notebook, but the sound of laughter upstairs wouldn't stop. Each peel of it scraped at my calm like sandpaper. I opened the safe, placed the flash drive inside, and whispered, "Soon." 2 nights later I found another chance. Aaron had gone on a business trip, and the children were asleep. Vanessa poured herself wine and sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. I pretended to dust the bookshelves nearby. When her phone buzzed, I caught the name that flashed on the screen: Derek C. She stood quickly, grabbed her purse, and went upstairs. I waited. When the door to the master bedroom closed, I crept into the living room. Her laptop sat open on the coffee table screen, glowing faintly. The email window was still active. Subject line: property transfer forms attached. My fingers hovered over the mouse. Slowly I scrolled. There it was again: Serene Holdings LLC. The attachment detailed the sale of the lake cabin, the transfer of accounts, all signed electronically under Aaron M. Brooks, though I knew he hadn't touched a thing. I copied the entire folder onto my flash drive and took photos of the screen. My pulse stayed steady. Fear had left me weeks ago. All that remained was purpose. The next morning, Vanessa acted as if the world were perfect. She hummed while watering the plants, talking to the children about summer camps. She even smiled at me, soft and sweet. "You've been quiet lately, Eleanor. Everything all right?" "Perfectly," I said, just thinking about how truth always finds daylight. She tilted her head, the smile tightening. "You sound almost threatening." "Not at all," I said, just wise. When she left the room, I whispered to the empty air, "Keep smiling, darling. I want that face in every frame." That night I reviewed all the data, the video, the emails, the transaction history. The puzzle pieces were forming a picture so clear, it made me tremble. Richard had known this could happen. He'd prepared every safeguard, left every document in my name. But the beauty of his foresight was that he'd also left breadcrumbs only I could find. Before bed, I opened his letter again. My fingers brushed the final line, "Use what's inside the safe when the time is right." I whispered into the dark, "The time is almost here." The house above me was quiet. Vanessa's door was closed, her laughter replaced by silence. Outside, the magnolia tree swayed under the moonlight, petals falling one by one onto the wet grass. I picked up my pen and wrote the last line for the day, Day 11. "She believes I'm blind. But blindness is just another word for watching without warning." I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and lay back on the cot. For the first time, I didn't dream of Richard or the past. I dreamed of the moment Vanessa's mask would crack and the sound it would make when it finally broke. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like thunder. I woke to the faint buzz of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. One new message from an unknown number. "Mrs. Brooks, this is Denton Law Office. Please call when you can. Urgent matter regarding Richard's estate." I sat up slowly, heart steady but aware. The time had come for the next move. I dressed, brushed my hair, and looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror. My face looked calm, too calm for someone living in a garage. Upstairs, the morning routine had already begun. Vanessa's voice echoed down the hall, bright and rehearsed. "Aaron, don't forget your meeting notes. And tell the office I'll handle the accountant call myself." When I entered the kitchen, she was already sipping her latte, her phone wedged between her shoulder and ear. She smiled without warmth. "Oh good, you're up. Could you make more coffee? The machine's being slow again." "Of course," I said, filling the pot. My hands moved automatically, but my mind wasn't here. It was already 3 steps ahead. Aaron looked tired, shadows under his eyes. He gave me a small nod. "Morning, Mom." "Morning, sweetheart," I said. As they left, Vanessa tossed over her shoulder, "Try not to let the dogs scratch the garage door again. It's expensive." When the car rolled down the driveway and the sound faded, the silence returned like an ally. I went upstairs, closed the office door, and dialed Denton's number. "Mrs. Brooks," he said immediately. His tone was firm but kind. "I'm glad you called. We received a notification from a holding company in Dallas, attempting to verify ownership of the Brooks estate. The inquiry came from someone using your daughter-in-law's credentials." I closed my eyes, exhaling. "She's been trying to move assets." "Yes. But fortunately she can't. Everything remains under your name exactly as Richard designed. Still, I'd like you to come in today. There's something you should see. I'll be there within the hour." I hung up, slipped the golden key into my purse, and left before anyone returned. The drive to Denton Law Office took 30 minutes, the road stretching long and quiet beneath gray clouds. Savannah rolled past my window, oak trees dripping with moss, old buildings with fading paint, the hum of a city that always pretended to be asleep. When I arrived, Denton himself greeted me at the door. His suit was immaculate, his expression grave but familiar. "Eleanor," he said softly, guiding me into the conference room. "Please, sit." On the polished mahogany table lay a thick file labeled Brooks Estate Trust. He opened it, pages neat and deliberate. "Richard was very thorough," Denton said. "Everything, the estate, the investments, the secondary properties, was transferred solely into your name. Legally no one can contest it." He handed me a folder. Inside I recognized Richard's handwriting. the loops, the slant, the steady confidence of his pen. There was a note attached: make sure Eleanor never has to ask permission to live in her own home. My throat tightened. He knew this would happen. He suspected, Denton replied gently. He told me once, Vanessa's charm is a weapon she hasn't learned how to holster yet. He wanted you to have protection. I ran my fingers along the pages, the crisp paper whispering beneath my touch. The total value was staggering: real estate accounts, investments, all amounting to nearly $30 million. Every cent legally tied to me. I looked up. What should I do next? Keep quiet, Denton said. Do not reveal this to anyone, especially your son. If Vanessa believes you're powerless, she'll grow careless. That's when you'll have control. I nodded. Thank you, Denton. Richard trusted you for a reason. He smiled faintly. He said you'd know when to strike the match. When I stepped out of the office, the clouds had thinned. The afternoon sun cut through warm against my face. For the first time since Richard's funeral, I didn't feel small. I felt tall enough to see the game for what it was. On the way home, I stopped by a small cafe on Broughton Street. It was quiet, tucked between an antique shop and a florist. I ordered a cappuccino, the same kind Richard used to bring me every Sunday morning. While waiting, I opened my phone, created a new email account under a different name, and uploaded copies of every document Denton had given me. Then I attached the hotel video, the financial statements, and the spa receipts, each labeled and dated. I set the account to auto backup daily. When I returned to the estate, the driveway was empty. Vanessa's car was gone again. The house was still, but the air felt different, thicker, more electric. I walked straight into the garage, sat at my desk, and opened my notebook. Day 12. Confirmation: Richard's full estate in my name. Vanessa, attempting transfer through Dallas contact. Action: maintain silence. Observe. Secure data. I paused before adding one last line: the time for fear is over. That evening when Vanessa returned, she was dressed in a pale blue suit, too formal for her supposed yoga classes. She dropped her keys on the counter and smiled. Oh, Eleanor, you're home. I wanted to talk to you about something important. I turned from the sink. Of course. She pulled out a chair at the table and gestured for me to sit. You've been through a lot lately, and I've been thinking it might be best if you let me handle the estate matters for now. You know, bills, accounts, insurance, it's a lot for someone your age. I studied her face carefully, the careful tilt of her head, the false sympathy in her tone. That's very kind, I said softly. But Richard handled everything before he passed. It's already taken care of. She frowned slightly. Still, there's no harm in transparency. I could have my lawyer look things over. Just to make sure you're comfortable. I'm perfectly comfortable. Her smile faltered. Eleanor, I'm only trying to help. I know, I said, setting down the towel I'd been holding. And I'm only trying to understand why your lawyer's name is Derek Cole. The color drained from her face. What? I stepped closer, keeping my voice calm. You should clear your inbox more carefully, dear. Some things are better left unsent. For a heartbeat, the silence between us pulsed with tension. Then she laughed, brittle and high. You've been spying on me, I smiled. No, just paying attention. She turned away sharply, pretending to pour herself water, but her hands trembled. Aaron won't believe you, she said, under her breath. He never does. Then let's not make him choose, I said. You and I will settle this quietly. She spun around, eyes flashing. What do you want? Nothing yet, I answered. But I'll let you know when I do. She stood there staring, searching for weakness. But she didn't find any. I picked up my cup, rinsed it under the faucet, and said lightly, You'll have to excuse me. The dogs need feeding. That night, as the house went still, I sat by the small window in the garage, watching lightning flicker over the distant trees. The air hummed with the sound of cicadas, a steady chorus of life returning after the storm. I opened the safe, took out Richard's letter again, and read it one more time. Use what's inside when the time is right. I whispered into the darkness, soon, love, very soon. I turned off the lamp and lay down. The golden key rested beneath my pillow, warm against my palm. Above me, the house creaked softly, a house that once betrayed me but now finally felt like it was waiting for my command. The war hadn't ended. But for the first time it no longer felt like theirs. It felt like mine. The message came through just before dawn, a calendar alert on Vanessa's laptop that she'd left open the night before. 9:45 a.m. Meeting Serenity Holdings. D. Cole. Riverfront Grand Hotel. I stared at it until the letters blurred. Then closed the lid softly. So this was how she spent her yoga mornings. By 8:30 the house was buzzing with her routine perfection. Perfume heels, keys tossed on the counter. "Aaron," she called, "remember to pick up the kids from school, I'll be tied up downtown." He answered from the living room without looking up. "Another wellness meeting, something like that," she said smoothly. Then she glanced at me sitting by the kitchen window. "Don't wait up for lunch, Eleanor, I'm sure you've got chores." I smiled. "We all have something to do today." She left in a flurry of lavender scent and self-satisfaction. 10 minutes later I slipped on my beige coat, tucked Richard's old phone in my purse, and called a cab. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, asked, "Where to, ma'am?" "Follow the pearl-white BMW in front of us," I said quietly. He looked at me in the mirror, half smiling. "You sound like someone who already knows how the story ends." "Maybe," I said, "but I need to see the middle first." The car wound through downtown Savannah streets, slick with last night's rain. The BMW stopped at the Riverfront Grand Hotel, a place of glass and gold, where secrets were traded more easily than room keys. I paid the driver and stepped out. The air smelled of river water and money. Through the revolving doors I saw her immediately. Vanessa, red dress, hair curled, makeup too deliberate for yoga. She walked with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed her applause. I followed from a distance, my old leather purse pressed against my hip. The lobby glowed with marble floors and soft jazz. Vanessa crossed toward the lounge, where a man waited at the bar. Derek Cole. His smile was too polished, his suit too sharp. He stood when she approached, brushed her hand with his lips and guided her to a table by the window. I sat at the far end behind a large potted palm. Richard's phone was already recording. For 15 minutes I filmed. They talked in low voices, their gestures too intimate for business. Derek handed her a thick brown envelope. She slipped it into her purse without a glance, laughing softly. He leaned close and whispered something that made her smile melt into something else, something hungry. When he reached across and touched her hand, I ended the recording. That was enough. I left through the side entrance into the bright heavy air of late morning. The river shimmered like glass. My heart beat steady. I wasn't angry. Anger was useless now. I was documenting. In the cab back home, the driver said nothing for a long time. Then, quietly, "You caught what you needed." I looked out the window at the moving oaks. I caught who she really is. When I returned to the estate, the house was empty. Sunlight poured through the foyer windows, falling across the marble floor. I went straight to the garage, turned on my laptop, and transferred the video from the phone. The image was clear, Vanessa laughing, Derek handing her the envelope, her fingers brushing his wrist. Proof didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered. I watched the footage twice, memorizing the details. Then I saved it under a file name. Richard would have liked evidence. 1. Patience pays. After that I opened my notebook. Day 13. Vanessa Brooks. Affair confirmed. Derek Cole, broker alias legal advisor. Meeting place Riverfront Grand Hotel. Envelope exchanged. Purpose likely money laundering for Serenity Holdings. Aaron unaware. I paused, then added, smile when she smiles. Listen when she lies. That afternoon I made tea and sat under the magnolia tree. The branches swayed, scattering white petals like paper confetti. Richard had planted it when Aaron was born. He used to say, "When this tree blooms, it means the family's doing all right." I looked at its flowers and thought, maybe it's blooming for me now. At 5:30 I heard her car crunch over the gravel. She came inside, humming, her cheeks, flushed hair perfectly curled. She set her purse down and called out, "Aaron, I'm home." I was at the kitchen counter slicing apples. She smiled when she saw me. "Oh, you're still here. Did you manage with the laundry?" "Yes," I said, wiping my hands. "Long day, productive," she said, pouring herself water. Yoga was intense. We focused on core strength. I smiled faintly. "I imagine that takes balance." She froze for a second, then laughed too quickly. You're funny. Not intentionally, I said. She brushed past me toward the stairs, still talking. Anyway, I might have a dinner meeting this weekend. Don't wait up. Of course, I said. I wouldn't dream of interrupting your networking. Her back stiffened. Then she disappeared down the hall. Later, as the house quieted, I returned to the garage. I played the video once more, the glow from the screen lighting the small room. Each time I watched it, I felt less pity and more precision. I transferred the footage to a new drive, labeled it Asset, Proof, 2, and placed it in the safe beside Richard's letter. Then I wrote again in my notebook, "She's proud today, let her be. Pride makes people careless." At dinner, Aaron sat silently pushing his food around the plate. Vanessa filled the air with noise about real estate markets and charity luncheons. "I might meet with investors in Charleston," she said brightly. "Derek's helping with the paperwork." Aaron nodded vaguely. "Derek, the broker guy." "Yes," she said too quickly, "strictly professional." I looked down at my plate to hide my smile. When the children excused themselves, I poured wine for the three of us. Vanessa lifted her glass. "To new beginnings." I clinked mine against hers gently. "To honesty," I said. Aaron glanced up confused. Vanessa's lips tightened, but she said nothing. After dinner, she vanished upstairs. I could hear her pacing the creak of the floorboards above my head. She called someone, her voice low, urgent. I caught fragments. "She knows. Too close. Handle it quietly." I smiled to myself in the dark. Before bed, I opened my notebook one last time. Day 14. Vanessa nervous. Mentioned, handle it quietly. Likely suspects exposure. Maintain composure. Denton to be informed soon. Then I took the printed photo of Richard from my drawer, the one from our 40th anniversary. He was laughing, his head thrown back, eyes full of light. I pressed the edge of the picture to my lips and whispered, "You were right, love. Silence is sharper than noise." The next morning she didn't come down until late. Her eyes were shadowed. Her confidence cracked just enough to show fear. "I might go visit my sister next weekend," she said, buttering toast she wouldn't eat. "Lovely," I replied, sipping my tea. "Will Derek drive you there or will you take the train?" Her hand froze mid-air. "What did you just say?" I set down my cup. "You heard me." The silence that followed felt like standing on a fault line. She forced a smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "You're confused, Eleanor. You've been under stress." "Possibly," I said. "But I'm also observant. You should try it sometime." She gathered her purse with shaking hands. "I don't have time for this." "Of course not," I murmured. Time is the one thing people always run out of when truth catches up. She left without another word, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I stood there for a moment, the echo fading. Then I smiled and whispered, "Run as fast as you like. I already have the evidence." That night the magnolia outside glowed under the moonlight, petals drifting across the lawn like quiet applause. Upstairs, Vanessa's bedroom was dark. For the first time I didn't hear her voice, her heels, or her laughter. Only the hum of the house breathing around me. I sat by the small window in the garage watching the petals fall, and wrote the final words for the day. Day 15. The storm has seen its reflection. Tomorrow it breaks. The storm broke just after midnight, thunder rolling like an angry drum over the marshes. I sat awake in the garage, the lamp's dim glow painting long shadows on the walls. Rain streaked across the small window and each flash of lightning illuminated the golden key resting beside my notebook. My mind was too alert for sleep. I'd caught her lies, recorded her betrayal, traced every stolen dollar. All that remained now was proof of her intent. By morning the air had cooled, the yard washed clean. Upstairs, Vanessa moved about in silence. There was no music, no humming. Only the hollow rhythm of a woman rehearsing calm. When I climbed the stairs, she stood by the counter with a cup of coffee, hair tied back, eyes red but defiant. "You didn't sleep," I said. "Neither did you." She took a slow sip. "We're all restless lately. I suppose conscience is noisy company." Her mouth twitched, but she said nothing. Aaron appeared behind her, adjusting his jacket, oblivious as always. "I'll be home late," he said, kissing her cheek. "Don't wait up." She smiled, mechanical. "Of course." When the door closed, I turned to her. Planning another yoga retreat, her gaze sharpened. You're really testing me, Eleanor. I'm just curious, I said, wiping the counter. You've been busy. She exhaled sharply, snatched her purse and left. The sound of her heels faded down the hallway, followed by the slam of the door. I stood still for a long time before moving. Then I went upstairs to the office, turned on her laptop and found what I'd been waiting for. The screen glowed with an open email draft subject line, bold and cold, divorce paperwork nearly finished waiting on estate confirmation. The sender's name chilled me, David Carrera, attorney at law, Dallas, Texas. I scrolled through the thread. Her messages were clinical detached, written by someone who had already erased her marriage from her mind. Once the assets are transferred under the new holding, we'll file immediately. The husband remains unaware. The mother-in-law must not interfere. My breath caught. At the bottom another name appeared. CCD. Cole. Derek. Of course. I read it twice, then once more, my pulse steady. They weren't just stealing. They were orchestrating a clean extraction, my son's divorce, my expulsion, and a total transfer of Richard's estate. I inserted a flash drive into the laptop and copied everything, the emails, attachments, and even the drafts she thought she'd deleted. When the progress bar reached 100%, I ejected it and slid it into my pocket. For a moment, I sat back in the chair and looked around the office. The framed photo of Richard still hung on the wall. His eyes, frozen in black and white, seemed to watch me. You always said timing is everything, I whispered. I think it's time. Downstairs the house was empty. I picked up the phone and dialed the only number that still made me feel grounded. Denton Law Office, came the familiar voice. It's Eleanor, I said. Mrs. Brooks, Denton replied, tone tightening. I've been expecting your call. What did you find? Everything I said. Emails, transfers, even a lawyer involved. Send it all to me, he said. Now. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop and attached the files to a new encrypted email. It's sent, I told him. You just did the right thing, Denton said softly. I'll handle the rest. But Eleanor, don't confront her yet. I smiled faintly. Oh, I won't. I'm done talking. I'm just listening now. After hanging up, I poured myself tea and sat by the window watching sunlight cut through the rain clouds. The garden gleamed, the magnolia blossoms wet and heavy. The same tree Richard planted all those years ago seemed to bow slightly in the wind, like it was nodding to me. That evening, Vanessa came home early. Her voice floated in from the hallway, false bright. Long day, huh? She called out. Every day's long when you're counting lies, I said, still facing the stove. She stiffened. Excuse me, I turned, wiping my hands on a towel. You left your laptop open again. Careless habit. Her face paled. You had no right. I had every right, I said quietly. It's my house. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Then she forced a laugh. Aaron will think you've lost it. Maybe, I said. But lawyers don't. She blinked rapidly. What are you talking about? I tilted my head, studying her. You should check your email. There's one missing. Her eyes widened. She turned abruptly and rushed upstairs. I heard her footsteps pounding down the hallway, then the click of her laptop, the frantic keystrokes. Moments later, her voice pierced the stillness. What did you do? I poured tea slowly, savoring the calm. I copied what you wrote. You should be more careful with digital trails. They're loyal to the truth. She stormed back down, face flushed. You don't understand what you've done. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said. You tried to steal from your husband, his father, and me. You almost succeeded. She gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white. You're bluffing. Am I? I reached into my pocket and placed the flash drive on the table between us. The small metal gleamed under the kitchen light. Everything's on there. And a copy's already with Denton. I sent it an hour ago. Her mouth fell open, her voice barely a whisper. You wouldn't. I would, I said. And I did. She stepped back, breathing hard. Then her expression shifted, defiance curling into something darker. You think this gives you power. You're just an old woman clinging to money that isn't yours. Funny, I said. That's exactly how I see you. She grabbed her purse, trembling. You'll regret this, Eleanor. I swear you will. Perhaps, I said. But regret is better than rot. She left without another word, the door slamming behind her. The sound echoed through the house like the end of a chapter. I stood there for a long while, letting the quiet settle. Then I opened my notebook. Day 16. Copied email chain confirming legal conspiracy. Sent to Denton. Vanessa, aware of exposure. Reaction panic. Prediction confrontation imminent. I underlined the final sentence. Be ready. Later that night the storm returned. Rain hammered the windows, wind rattled the shutters. Upstairs light flickered in the master bedroom, Vanessa pacing, calling someone, her voice rising and falling like a trapped animal. I heard one clear sentence through the vent above me. She's ruined everything, Derek. Everything. I smiled, faintly in the dark. No, dear, I whispered. You ruined yourself. At 2 a.m, silence fell again. I switched on the lamp and looked around the small garage that had become both prison and fortress. The walls no longer felt confining. They felt protective. I opened Richard's letter for the 100th time. The words were beginning to fade, where my thumb had pressed them too often, but the message was still clear. When they think you've lost, that's when you start winning. Outside the rain slowed to a drizzle. I walked to the window and watched the first light of dawn break through the clouds. The sky was bruised purple, the earth slick with silver. I whispered to the rising sun, "It's done, Richard. I've built the case. Now it's her turn to fall." The wind rustled the magnolia branches in response, scattering a few petals across the wet lawn. I closed the curtain, returned to my bed and lay down. Sleep came easily this time, soft and deep. For the first time in months I didn't dream of revenge. I dreamed of stillness, the kind that comes right before the world changes its balance. The morning after the storm was unnaturally still. The house seemed to hold its breath, as if it knew something irreversible was about to happen. I brewed coffee in silence, the smell of roasted beans drifting through the kitchen like memory. Aaron hadn't come downstairs yet. Vanessa's car was still in the driveway, but her shoes were gone from their usual place. That small absence told me more than words ever could. When I stepped into Richard's old office, the door was already ajar. Aaron stood inside, shoulders tense, holding a stack of yellowed papers. The light from the window fell across his face, pale and uncertain. "Mom," he said, voice unsteady, "you need to see this." I moved closer. In his hands was a folder marked in Richard's handwriting, Brooks' estate, will and testament. My breath caught. I hadn't seen that file since the lawyer's reading months ago. Aaron turned a page, confusion thick in his tone. "It says here, everything, the house, the accounts, they're all in your name. Why would Dad?" "Because he trusted me," I said softly, "and he wanted to protect us." Before he could speak again, the door slammed open. Vanessa stood at the threshold, her hair unkempt, lipstick smudged, fury radiating off her like heat. "What are you holding?" she demanded. Aaron froze. "It's Dad's will." She strode forward and snatched it from his hands, flipping through the pages. Her eyes darted line to line until she stopped at Richard's signature. "This can't be right," she whispered. Then louder. "You lied. You've been pretending all this time." I placed my coffee cup on the desk carefully. "Pretending? You wanted us to feel guilty," she spat. "You played poor while sitting on millions. You let me think we were struggling." I met her glare calmly. "I didn't let you think anything, Vanessa. You assumed what you wanted to believe." Aaron tried to interject. Vanessa, stop. She turned on him, eyes blazing. "Don't you see? She's manipulating us. This is all part of her plan." I opened my purse and took out a small flash drive. "If you want to talk about plans, maybe we should discuss yours." She went silent. I walked to the laptop on the desk, plugged it in and opened the folder labeled Proof. On the screen the video began to play. The hotel lounge appeared, Vanessa in her red dress, laughing, Derek Cole, sliding the brown envelope across the table. Aaron's face drained of color. "What is this?" Vanessa lunged forward, slamming the laptop shut. "It's nothing. You're invading my privacy." I reopened it with a click. "It's evidence," I said. "Affair, conspiracy, fraud, choose whichever term suits you best." Aaron stared between us, disbelief tightening his jaw. "Vanessa. Tell me, that's not you." She hesitated. "I was meeting a client who kissed your wrist in a hotel bar," I asked. Her composure cracked. "You've been spying on me. I've been surviving you," I said quietly. The room fell silent, except for the rain dripping from the eaves outside. Aaron sank into Richard's old chair, eyes wide with the weight of realization. I placed another document on the desk, printed emails between Vanessa and her attorney David Carrera. The top subject line read, "Divorce paperwork nearly finished, waiting on estate confirmation." Aaron picked up the papers, scanning the lines. His lips moved as he read. You were filing for divorce after everything." She grabbed the papers from his hand, voice shaking. "It wasn't like that. Derek said it was the only way to protect our money." "Our money," I repeated softly. "You mean mine?" She turned on me, desperation twisting her face. "You can't keep everything, Eleanor. You're old, you don't need all this. I deserve something for what I've done for this family." I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. "What you've done, Vanessa, is try to destroy it." Aaron stood, his expression breaking into disbelief and anger. "I can't believe this. You used me. You used Dad's death." "Don't turn on me," she shouted, clutching the edge of the desk. "Everything I did was for us." "No," I said, "everything you did was for yourself." Her hands trembled as she pointed at me. "You've been waiting for this moment, haven't you? To humiliate me, to show me I was never good enough for your precious son." I met her gaze and didn't flinch. "You did that yourself." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Aaron's voice cracked through the tension. "I've been such a fool," he whispered. I touched his arm gently. "No, son. You just mistook silence for peace. But silence can be cruel when it lets evil grow." He nodded, eyes glassy with shame. Vanessa's breathing grew ragged. "You'll regret this," she said. "Both of you. I'll find another lawyer. I'll contest the will." Enough," I said sharply. "You're finished." I reached into my bag and placed a small envelope on the desk. Inside were printed photos of her at the hotel, receipts from the spa, transfers from the household account to Serenity Holdings LLC. "This is what I'll send to the court if you try anything else. And if you think I'm bluffing, ask Derek how the Texas Gaming Commission feels about his debt at Grand Mirage Casino." Her face went white. You found that?" I nodded once. "I know everything, Vanessa. Every dollar, every lie, every whisper." Aaron turned away, covering his face with his hand. "I can't even look at you." She took a step toward him. "Aaron, please, don't," he said, his voice breaking. "Don't you dare." For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. Then she straightened, her eyes flashing with that last spark of arrogance. "You think you've won? You'll die alone, Eleanor. This house will bury you." I smiled faintly. "No, dear. It will remember who built it." She stared at me for a long, hateful second, then stormed out, the echo of her heels fading down the hall. The sound was like a gavel striking wood. Final. Aaron slumped into the chair again, rubbing his temples. "What happens now?" "Now," I said softly, "we start over." He looked up, eyes weary. "I don't even know where to begin." "Right here," I said. "By telling the truth." He nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mom. For all of it." "You don't have to be," I said. "Just don't let guilt turn into blindness again." We sat in silence for a while. The rain had stopped completely. Light poured through the window, illuminating Richard's portrait above the desk. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel heavy. It felt honest. Before leaving the room, I looked back once more at the will lying open on the table, Richard's signature gleaming under the sunlight. I touched the edge of the page with my fingertips and whispered, "I kept my promise, love." As I closed the door behind me, I heard Aaron moving around the office, gathering papers, locking drawers, putting things back in order. The sound was steady, deliberate, almost cleansing. Downstairs, I poured myself tea and sat by the window. Outside, the magnolia tree swayed gently in the wind. For the first time, its blossoms didn't look heavy. They looked free. Upstairs, Vanessa's room remained shut, but I knew the silence behind that door wasn't peace anymore. It was the sound of something breaking beyond repair. I sipped my tea and wrote in my notebook, Day 17, Truth revealed. Vanessa exposed. Aaron awake. House reclaiming balance. War nearly won. Then I closed the book and smiled. The widow in the garage had finally taken back her place upstairs. The day after the confrontation, the air in the house was brittle like a window just waiting to crack. Vanessa hadn't come out of her room all morning. Aaron moved quietly, avoiding questions, but I could feel the storm gathering behind every step. I spent the early hours in the kitchen, sorting through paperwork, marking each file with careful precision. The calm before a reckoning always had its own rhythm, slow, measured, deliberate. By noon I heard it. The sharp slam of a door upstairs, followed by the staccato sound of high heels striking the wood. She descended like a storm breaking its leash, eyes bloodshot, jaw set. Aaron appeared from the hallway, face pale but resolute. "Mom," he said, voice trembling slightly, "stay here." "No," I said. "It's time you both face this." He hesitated, then nodded. "Sable, don't," she snapped, her voice slicing the air. "Don't you dare talk to me like I'm the villain." Aaron stood straighter. "You lied to me. You lied about everything." She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "I did what I had to do. You don't understand what it's like being married to a man who lets his mother run his life." Her words hit like slaps, but I didn't flinch. "If protecting what your husband's father built is control, then I'm guilty," I said evenly. She turned to me trembling. "You're not a saint, Eleanor. You've been pretending to be some martyr, but you're just a manipulative old woman who hides behind money." Aaron stepped between us. "Enough, this ends now." "Oh, it ends all right," she hissed, pulling her phone from her pocket. "I'll call my lawyer. I'll prove you forged the will that you're unstable." I took a slow breath. "You might want to rethink that." Her thumb froze above the screen. I reached for my phone and tapped a single contact. "Caleb," I said when he answered, "initiate the asset protection order and proceed with the documentation we discussed." Vanessa's eyes widened. "You can't." "I already did," I said. "Everything you touched, every account you tried to move, every document you sent, all recorded, all submitted. You'll receive a notice by tomorrow morning." Aaron turned to me, confusion shadowing his face. "Mom, what notice?" "The restraining order," I said softly. "For financial and emotional misconduct." Vanessa's voice rose into a shriek. "You can't do this to me. You think you can just erase me." I met her gaze unblinking. "You erased yourself when you chose greed over family." Aaron ran a hand through his hair, breathing hard. "Just stop, both of you." But it was too late. The truth was already unspooling thread by thread. Vanessa's tone dropped to a whisper. "You'll regret this, Eleanor. You think you've won because of a few papers and a stupid video." I walked to the mantel and picked up the framed family photo, the one taken years ago before the bitterness had settled in. "Winning isn't the goal," I said quietly. "Survival is. Integrity is. And for once this house will belong to the people who understand that." She took a shaky step forward. "You think you're better than me." "No," I said, "just older. And patient enough to let people hang themselves with their own rope." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Aaron's shallow breathing. Then he said, voice low, "Sable, pack your things." She turned on him, disbelieving. "You're throwing me out." "I'm asking you to leave before the police escort you," he said. Her lips trembled. "You'd do that to me. After everything." He swallowed hard. "After everything." For a long moment she stared at him, fury and disbelief twisting her face into something unrecognizable. Then she said, her voice cracking, "You'll regret this when I'm gone. You'll miss me." Aaron didn't reply. He simply turned and walked to the front door. Vanessa's hands shook as she grabbed her suitcase from the corner of the hall. The sound of the zipper was harsh, final. She threw a few clothes in, not caring how they landed. When she passed me, she stopped, her voice sharp but unsteady. "You think this makes you powerful? You're just an old woman waiting to die alone." I smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but I'll die with peace." Her eyes burned, but she said nothing more. She slammed the door behind her so hard that a small picture frame fell from the wall. The sound of her car starting, gravel crunching under the tires, faded into distance until only silence remained. Aaron leaned against the wall, covering his face with his hands. His voice broke. "God, Mom. I didn't see any of it. I didn't see her." I walked over and placed my hand on his shoulder. "You saw what you wanted to see. That's what love does." He nodded weakly. "What do I do now?" "You live," I said. "You rebuild." He sank onto the sofa, head bowed, shoulders shaking. "I don't know how to start over." "You already have," I said. "By choosing truth." We sat in silence for a long time. The house, once filled with noise and tension, now felt still, almost tender. The air seemed lighter as if it had finally exhaled. I made tea the way Richard used to like it, with honey and a squeeze of lemon. When I handed a cup to Aaron, his hands trembled slightly as he took it. "She'll fight this," he said finally. "She won't go quietly." "I know," I said, "but she's fighting shadows now." He looked at me, eyes raw. "I should have protected you." "You did," I said softly. "Just not in the way you thought. You gave me time. That's all I needed." He gave a small broken laugh. "You always were the strong one." "No," I said. "I just ran out of tears sooner than most." We sat there until the tea went cold. Outside, the magnolia tree swayed gently in the breeze, petals falling like slow confetti. By evening, Aaron had fallen asleep on the couch, exhaustion overtaking him. I covered him with Richard's old navy blanket and stood for a moment watching my son, older, now bruised by his own choices but finally awake. I turned off the lights and walked upstairs to the master bedroom. The room still smelled faintly of oak and lavender, like it had the night Richard and I first moved in. I opened the window, letting the evening air in. The house was quiet again, but not empty. It was breathing. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the books on the nightstand, the framed letters on the wall, the faint ring of dust where Richard's watch used to rest. For the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost in this house. I felt like its pulse. Downstairs, I could still hear the faint rhythm of Aaron's sleep. Outside, the magnolia leaves rustled, whispering through the night. I took out my notebook and wrote, slowly, deliberately, Day 18. The war ended with silence, not noise. She's gone. The house breathes again. My son is free. Justice finally is quiet. I closed the book, placed it on the nightstand, and lay back against the pillows. For the first time in years, I didn't dream of storms, only of open windows, soft air, and a magnolia tree swaying under a sky that no longer threatened rain. 3 days after Vanessa left the house, felt like it was learning how to breathe again. Sunlight pooled across the floors instead of stopping at closed doors. The silence wasn't sharp anymore, it was gentle, steady, like the hum of peace returning after a long war. I walked through the room slowly that morning, touching the furniture, straightening frames, rediscovering what it meant to belong here. Every sound felt lighter now, the soft creak of the stairs, the kettle's whistle, the wind whispering through the magnolia branches outside. Around mid-morning the phone rang. I wiped my hands on a towel before answering. "Mrs. Brooks," said the calm, familiar voice on the other end. "This is Denton." "It's done." I leaned against the counter. "The restraining order, approved by the county court this morning," he said. "Vanessa and her associate Derek Cole are legally barred from contacting you or Aaron for the next 2 years. Any violation and law enforcement will handle it directly." For a long moment I couldn't speak. Relief came not like a rush but like a slow wave, washing away something that had clung to me for months. "Thank you, Denton," I said quietly. "Truly. You did what most wouldn't," he said. "You kept your dignity and let the truth do the talking." When the call ended, I stood there in the kitchen, eyes closed, listening to the faint ticking of the wall clock. The fight was over, not because I'd destroyed anyone, but because I'd refused to let them destroy me. That afternoon, Aaron came home earlier than usual. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his face drawn but lighter. "It's done," he said, simply setting a folder on the table. "The divorce papers are filed. My lawyer has all the evidence." I nodded, pouring him tea. "Good. No more secrets." He sat across from me, staring into his cup. "You know the hardest part," he said softly. "It's not losing her. It's realizing I lived with a stranger and didn't even see it." I reached across the table and took his hand. "That's what betrayal does. It blinds good people, not bad ones." He looked up, eyes wet. "I let her make me believe you were the problem." I squeezed his hand gently. "And now you know better. That's all that matters." The next morning the news spread faster than I expected. The Savannah Herald ran a headline on page 2, "Local broker, under investigation for fraud, extortion, and forged real estate contracts." Below the title was a photo of Derek Cole being led out of the courthouse, face pale, head down. When I finished reading, I folded the paper neatly and set it aside. Justice didn't always need applause. Sometimes it only needed acknowledgement. Later that day, Denton called again. "The investigation's expanding," he said. "They've confirmed Mr. Cole owes more than $200,000 to a Dallas casino and falsified signatures on 2 property contracts. The police are coordinating with federal authorities. I said only good. There was no joy in his downfall, just a quiet relief that the world for once had caught up to the truth. Over the next few days, the house began to feel alive again. Ava and Liam returned from their mother's temporary custody arrangement, shy at first, then slowly smiling. I baked cookies for them, my old recipe, butter and cinnamon. When they tasted them, their faces lit up with the kind of happiness I thought this house had forgotten. Grandma Ava said, brushing crumbs from her fingers. Dad said, "You fixed everything." I smiled. "No, sweetheart. I just helped things go back where they belonged." Liam piped up between bites. "Mom said you're mad at her." I paused. "I'm not mad," I said carefully. "But sometimes people make choices that hurt others. The important thing is to learn from them." He frowned, thinking, then nodded like he understood. Children always understood more than adults gave them credit for. That evening, after I tucked them in, I found Aaron sitting in the study with a glass of water, staring at a blank notepad. "I don't even know what comes next," he admitted. "The house feels too big now." "Then fill it," I said. "Not with things, with kindness, with purpose." He nodded, eyes distant. "You always make it sound simple." "It's not simple," I said. "It's just worth it." 2 days later, the story hit national outlets. Houston Business Review ran a feature titled, "Broker's Betrayal Exposed by Family Whistleblower." They didn't use my name, but I didn't need them to. Denton called again that afternoon, sounding almost amused. "The industry's buzzing," he said. "People are asking how you stayed so composed through all this." I laughed quietly. "Years of marriage, motherhood and storms, Denton. You learn." That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat by the window and watched the magnolia blossoms sway under the porch light. The air smelled of wet soil and honey. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled softly across the horizon, not angry this time, just distant. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Day 21, peace finally." Not because the noise stopped, but because it no longer controls me. Aaron healing. Children laughing. House breathing. The next morning, Aaron left early for therapy, something his lawyer had suggested. When he returned later that afternoon, there was something different about him. The tension in his shoulders had eased, and his voice was quieter, steadier. "You were right," he said simply. "Talking helps." "Good," I said. "Keep doing it." He gave me a small smile. "You know, the therapist asked me what forgiveness means. I told him it's stopping the past from running your life." I nodded. "That's exactly what it is." In the days that followed, I found myself falling into a new rhythm. I hired Estelle, a kind woman from the Dominican Republic, to help maintain the house. She moved quietly, hummed old songs, and treated every room like it was sacred. The first time she asked whether she should clean the downstairs garage, I said, "Leave it as it is. It's a reminder of where I started." She nodded, eyes gentle, and never mentioned it again. Each morning the smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the house. Each evening laughter replaced whispers. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours again. One afternoon, while sorting through Richard's old desk, I found the wooden box he had left for me. Inside, beneath the last letter I'd already read, was another envelope I'd never noticed before. The handwriting was his, neat, slanted, unmistakable. On the front, he had written just 2 words. "For after." I opened it carefully. Inside was a single note. "Cass, if you're reading this, it means you've made it through the storm. You've always been stronger than you think. Remember, power isn't what you take, it's what you keep when no one's watching. Use it well. Love, R." The paper trembled in my hands. For a long time I just sat there staring at the words. Outside, the magnolia tree swayed gently in the golden light, its petals scattering across the grass. I whispered, "I did it, Richard. I kept what mattered." That night, as the moon rose over the garden, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders. The cicadas sang, the children's laughter echoed faintly from upstairs, and the house for the first time in years felt at peace. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the weight of years lift from my chest. I had fought back, not with cruelty but with patience. Not with anger but with truth. And that, I realized, was its own kind of victory. The wind rustled softly through the magnolia leaves, carrying the faintest whisper of Richard's voice through the night. "You did well, Cass," it seemed to say. And for the first time I believed it. It had been 3 months since the house fell quiet again. Summer had melted into autumn, and the magnolia tree outside my window had traded its blossoms for gold. Each morning the light came softer, spilling across the kitchen counters in honey-colored ribbons. I no longer woke up with a start, no longer listened for footsteps overhead. The echoes that once haunted these walls had finally become peace. I began each day the same way, brewing tea, feeding the dogs, then walking through the garden Richard planted decades ago. The earth still smelled of him, clean faintly, sweet steady. Some mornings I'd talk to the wind like it could carry my voice to wherever he was. "You'd laugh, Richard," I'd say. "Everything's in its place again." One cool morning Aaron called from the city. His voice sounded lighter than it had in years. "Mom," he said, "the foundation papers are ready. Denton said we can sign this week." I smiled. "Then it's time." That Friday we drove together to Denton's office. The ride was quiet, peaceful, the kind of silence that no longer needed to be filled. The courthouse loomed ahead, red brick against a pale sky. Inside the conference room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. Denton greeted us warmly. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, shaking my hand, "you look 10 years younger." "Peace does that," I replied. He smiled and opened a cream-colored folder. On the first page in bold black letters it read, "The Brooks Family Foundation for Education and Integrity." Below that, my name was listed as founder and trustee. I traced the letters with my finger. "He would have liked this," I said softly. Aaron nodded. "He'd be proud." Denton passed me a pen. "Once you sign here, everything's official. The assets, the scholarship fund, the legal protections all secured under your direction." I signed slowly, letting the ink soak into the paper. When it was done, I leaned back and exhaled. Aaron smiled. "You just made something new out of everything they tried to take." "Not just something new," I said. "Something that lasts." On the way home, we stopped for lunch at a small cafe near the river. Aaron ordered his father's favorite shrimp and grits with extra lemon. As we ate, he said, "The kids can't wait to visit you in Savannah. Ava wants to learn to cook. Liam's been drawing pictures of the dogs. They'll have plenty of space here," I said, "and plenty of love." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You know, Mom, I used to think strength meant shouting the loudest. But you proved it's the opposite." I smiled. "Strength," whispers Aaron. "And it always leaves room for forgiveness." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "You've forgiven her, haven't you?" "I don't need to carry her anymore," I said simply. That's what forgiveness really means. When I got home that evening, the house greeted me with golden light spilling through the windows. Estelle had left a vase of fresh lilies on the table. I made tea and sat by the porch watching the sunset stretch across the water. The magnolia branches swayed their leaves, rustling like soft applause. That night, I checked my email one last time before bed. Among the usual bank alerts and newsletters was a new message from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." I opened it. The sender's name made my heart slow for a beat, Vanessa. Her message was short, "Eleanor, I know I have no right to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know I've been in counseling. I lost everything, but maybe that's what I needed to see who I really was. You didn't deserve what I did to you. I'm sorry, I mean that." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then quietly, I deleted it. Not out of anger but because forgiveness doesn't always need words to prove it. The next morning I woke early, unable to shake the feeling that something new was calling me. I packed a small suitcase, locked the house, and drove toward the coast. The highway stretched long and empty, sunlight spilling over the marshes. 3 hours later, I reached the place I hadn't visited since before Richard died, our seaside home in Charleston. The white villa still stood there quiet against the blue horizon. When I stepped inside, dust motes danced in the air, catching the light like tiny memories. Everything was as he'd left it. The books, the framed photo from our 50th anniversary, the small oak table where he used to write letters he never sent. I opened the windows. Sea wind rushed in, filling the room with the scent of salt and sunlight. Outside waves rolled softly against the shore. I walked out to the balcony, the same one where we'd once watched storms roll in together. The ocean stretched endlessly ahead, blue and vast. I whispered, "I came back, Richard." That evening I invited the local caretakers Lucia and her husband Matteo for dinner. Lucia brought fresh bread, Matteo brought wine. We sat outside, laughter mingling with the sound of the waves. "To new beginnings," Matteo said, raising his glass. "To peace," I answered. After they left, I stood alone under the stars. The air was warm, the sea calm. I could hear the faint music of a radio from a nearby boat, a slow jazz tune that reminded me of Richard's favorite records. I went inside, found one of his old letters in the drawer, and unfolded it carefully. The ink had faded, but his words were still clear. "Cass, if you ever find yourself at the bottom, remember the ground there will help you push back up." I smiled. "I did push back, love," I whispered. "And I didn't just rise, I learned to rest." The following week passed in a blur of quiet joy. I walked the beach at dawn, let the waves kiss my feet, and watched children build castles in the sand. I volunteered at the local clinic, helping tourists find medicine, guiding them with patience I didn't know I still had. The nurses started calling me Miss Eleanor of the Sea. I didn't correct them. Each night I sat on the porch and wrote in my journal, "Peace isn't the absence of storms. It's knowing you can stand through them." One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Aaron called on video. Ava and Liam crowded into the frame, faces bright with laughter. Grandma Ava said proudly, "We planted tomatoes. They're already growing," I laughed. "Everything beautiful starts with planting." Aaron smiled. "You planted strength, Mom. We're just trying to keep it growing." After the call ended, I walked to the water's edge. The tide was low, the sand cool beneath my feet. I whispered, "Richard, do you see the family safe again?" The sky deepened into gold and pink waves, reflecting the light like glass. I stood there until the stars came out, feeling the quiet thrum of life all around me. That night before bed, I wrote my last entry in the leather notebook that had followed me through every battle. I lost what I thought defined me: home, love, peace. But in losing, I found myself again. Revenge never rebuilt anything, truth did. And now when I look at the sea, I don't see endings, I see beginnings, waiting beneath the tide. I closed the book and placed it beside Richard's photograph. Then I opened the window and let the sea breeze in. The curtains lifted softly white against the moonlight. I whispered one last time, "Thank you for the lessons, love. I finally understand them." If you're still here listening to my story, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Have you ever had to rebuild your peace from the ashes of betrayal? Leave your story in the comments below and let someone else know they're not alone. Because if my journey taught me anything, it's that kindness, quiet, patient kindness, is still the strongest power we have. So if this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the next one. I promise the next chapter will remind you that no matter how dark the night feels, there's always a sunrise waiting just beyond the sea.